This is Module 2C, Example 3 on page 48. So earlier we read about the 5-number summary. If you recall, that's the minimum, quartile 1, median, quartile 3, followed by the maximum. So here in Part A, we're given the 5-number summary for students on Exam 1 of last semester's statistics class. So our numbers are 57, 74, 79, 87, and 96. Which of these numbers is the median? So if we look here, our middle number is 79. So that must be our median score. Quartile 1, remember, comes second after the minimum. So quartile 1 must be 74. And quartile 3 is 87 right here before the maximum. So now we're going to use these 5 numbers to construct a box plot, just like we saw in the last example. So the way I set this up down here, this 1 means this is where exam 1 is going to go. And the 2 means this is where exam 2 is going to go, because we're going to construct 2 side-by-side box plots. So for exam 1, I'm going to start with the box. So the box is going to go from quartile 1 to quartile 3, or from 74 to 87. And so we can only draw it in here as best as we can. So I'll come right around here to right around where I think 74 is, and then come over to 87 to make my box. Okay, so that's my box here, and then I need to make right through the middle. I'm going to make another box so I can show that the median goes right through 80. I'm going to adjust my box a little bit. I'm going to draw another box. Okay, so mine's maybe not as good as you guys can draw. So, and maybe my peak here needs to go a little bit higher, up to 87. Maybe this end needs to come in a little bit. Okay, so I'm confident you can all draw better boxes than I did. Now we want to go out to our whiskers. So our lower whisker needs to go all the way down to 57. And I'm limited to using an arrow, but you can all draw the dots like we saw in the other example. So our one whisker will look like this, and our upper whisker needs to go all the way to 96. Okay, so our upper whisker will look something like this. And again, you all have pens and pencils and can draw better looking box plots than I do. But it should look something like this. Down below, they're giving us information about exam 2. So here's our 5-number summary for exam 2, and we want to go ahead and construct a box plot for that. So our interquartile range for exam 2 goes all the way from 70 to 83, and the mean is at 75. Okay, so our box should look something like this, where we see that the quartile 1 in this case starts lower, the median is lower, and it goes all the way up to quartile 3, which is also lower than exam 1. And then our whiskers here need to extend a little bit further out. Our lower whisker needs to go to 62 and our upper whisker to 90. So we're going to come from here down to 62, which is not too far. And then from here to 90, which is also not too far. So maybe mine's hard to see with the arrows, but extend your whiskers not too far in either direction here. So now we can calculate which exam had the smaller IQR. Oh. So for exam 1, our IQR is going to be 87 subtract 74. And we see that that difference is 13 points. For exam 2, our IQR is going to be 83 subtract 70. And that difference is also 13 points. So in this case, both exams have the same size interquartile range. And so if you look back at our box plots, hopefully yours are drawn a little bit better than mine, you can see the boxes are about the same distance in the drawing. And remember, no drawing is ever going to be perfect, but I think you could draw better than I did with a computer. Let's look at example 4 on page 49. So this is all about how we determine outliers. So our question is, should you put your savings into a fund that buys stocks or a fund that invests in real estate? And the box plots below compare what's known as the daily returns, which are percents on the stock market fund and on the real estate fund for 1 year. So it asks, what were the highest and lowest daily returns on the stock fund? And remember, these are percents, so the lowest is right around negative 3.5%. And the highest return looks to be 3.0%. Remember, we can just estimate because we don't have enough information to know the actual data. It looks like the median is the same on both investments, and it looks like the median is a little bit higher than 0. So I'm going to say maybe it's 0.2%. We could say the median was about 0.2% for each investment. Now it's asking us to calculate the IQR for each fund investment. So for stocks, we can do this. For real estate, we're going to have to use some guesswork. So we're going to say stocks IQR looks to be 0.5 subtract, I'm going to say that looks to me like negative 0.3. You guys might be able to read it better. So that IQR for stocks looks to be about 0.8 because remember, when we have 2 negatives in a row, we're going to add. Remember, that's percent. The real estate IQR looks like it's right about maybe 0.3 subtract maybe 0.1. It's really hard to see here. So that interquartile range is just 0.2%. Question D tells us that a data point is considered a suspected outlier if it falls more than 1.5 times the IQR above the third quartile or below the first quartile. So here we want to calculate 1.5 times the IQR for the stock fund. So we're going to say stock fund 1.5 times our IQR of 0.8. So you might get out a calculator to do this. Then you should get 1.8 2 on your calculator. Now we'll do the same thing for the real estate fund. We're going to say 1.5 times 0.2%, and that should be 0.3. So anything that goes above or below these distances from the quartiles is considered an outlier. So let's go look at stock funds. Is there anything below 1.2% of the first quartile? So the first quartile we said is right here at 0.3. And it definitely looks like if we come all the way down that the stock fund goes more than 1.2% down. So the stock fund has lower outliers. If we look above from 0.5, well, 0.5 plus 1.7 or plus 1.2 would be 1.7 as the upper bound for outliers for the stock. And it looks like there are definitely values also above the upper bound. So for the stock fund, there are suspected outliers both below the first quartile and above the third quartile. Now let's check it out for real estate. Real estate's IQR is 0.3%, and it looks like, we said this was right around 0.2%, it looks like real estate doesn't have any outliers, maybe one upper outlier, it's hard to see. So for real estate, there do not appear to be outliers. There could be an upper outlier, but it is difficult to read, we could say. Definitely not as extreme as in the stock fund. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at example 5 on page 50. Remember, when you're watching the video, if you want more time to write something down, you can just pause and then resume once you've written down the notes. So example 5 is all about spotting suspected outliers. So here are these travel times for workers in New York State, and it's asking us what's the interquartile range. So we can go ahead and calculate out the interquartile range. We know is going to be 42.5, subtract 15, and we see that that gives us 27.5. And remember, that was minutes. So now we're going to calculate 1.5 times 27.5 minutes is going to equal 41.25. So this is our 1.5 times the interquartile range. Now it wants us to add this to the third quartile. So the third quartile is 42.5 plus this 41.25. So when we total this up, we get 83.75 minutes. So this is what's known as the upper limit for the outlier. And so are there any travel times above this? Well, our maximum, 85, is above this, so yes. So we say, yes, the maximum travel time of 85 minutes is above the upper limit for an outlier. So this means we can classify that maximum of 85 minutes as an outlier. So this is the way that we classify outliers, is by calculating the upper limits, and then anything above the upper limit or similarly below the lower limit gets classified as an outlier. So now let's check for lower outliers. We've got 41.25, and we're going to subtract that from our first quartile. So if we look back, our first quartile was 15. So if we say 15, subtract 41.25, that's going to put us in the negative. So we'll end up at negative 26.25 minutes. So this obviously doesn't make sense to have a negative travel time. So we would say 0 would be the cutoff, and there's not going to be, in this case, any lower outliers. There may be situations where negative makes sense, so we don't want to always rule it out, but often a negative lower bound wouldn't make sense. Okay, so we'll say here there are no negative travel times, so there are no lower outliers.